Awaken, awaken, my brother, awaken.
So, isn't it amazing that if we really trust and we open up and we really do, like Ricky was saying, hand it over to God and say, I don't know how this is going to work, how I'm going to do it. My best plans have never brought me the peace and happiness. My best imaginings, all my so-called creative imaginings of how could I finagle that or how could I work that, it sends you like in a tizzy, because it still is this belief that somehow we're in charge of our own awakening. And in the Course in Miracles, Jesus says these beautiful lines, you cannot wake yourself, but you can allow yourself to be awakened. Wow. You cannot wake yourself, but you can allow yourself to be awakened. And how, if you believe you're a small identity, if you're a little personality, a little body identity, how could you possibly really, really believe that you have the know-how to get out of a dream that you believe in and that you would say the ego made up so tricky with so many entanglements and so much complexity that you would be more likely to get depressed or be suicidal than you would actually to have hope that you could escape from the dream. So that is a big line. You cannot wake yourself, but you can allow yourself to be awakened. It sounds like our theme we were talking about last night about allowance and permission. Nobody talked to us about allowance and permission. We heard about grades, we heard about survival, we heard about becoming bigger, better, more, becoming the best, and all these things in the world, but nobody was there saying, just give yourself permission to let it all go, just give yourself the allowance to be in touch with your feelings, and then to be lifted up and carried beyond whatever you are thinking and perceiving. You can't, Einstein was talking about, you can't solve a problem from within the problem. You literally have to go beyond the problem for the solution. And that's what we call faith in the Spirit. When we cry out, something in our heart just cries out, help me, really, I mean it. I'm really sincere now for that help. And then we call it divine intervention. We call it the Spirit is able to use the symbols to reach you wherever you believe you are, whatever you believe you are, to use those symbols, but we still have to have the faith and the trust to kind of get out of the driver's seat, to believe that we're the ones that are personally in charge of our waking up from this dream. That's the frustration. No matter how ingenious we become, no matter how our skill level rises up, and even no matter how much recognition we get from the world with our achievements, with awards or with skills and abilities, there's still a sense of depression until we finally surrender, until we finally kind of symbolically get down on our knees and say, I will step back and let you lead the way. You show me. You guide me. Let me not try to inform you, Spirit, on the ways. You inform me. We finally are willing to be instructed. Yes, intuitively instructed in the awakening process. There's a part in the Course, one of the most beautiful lines in the Course is, resign now as your own teacher. Resign! Hand in your resignation. How sneaky the ego is, even when you start working with the Course, because you're working through the Course, you're doing the text, and you're doing the lessons and everything, then you start peeking at the teacher's manual. Ooh, teacher's manual. And it looks like that you've got a profession coming down there. Ooh, teacher. Oh, teaching A Course in Miracles. Ooh. And yet, the ego will try to piggyback and hop on that one and make you a personal teacher. Because as long as it can maintain any sense of the personal, it knows that it's hidden. It will remain hidden. And so, in the end, if you follow it out, you really do have to get into the vibe of to teach is to demonstrate. To teach is not through the words. It's not through the concepts. You know, those can be part of the training, but in the end, you have to, again, resign now as your own teacher and be taught through. You know, let the Holy Spirit go before you and do the teaching. And of course, that's through attitude. Your attitude is the teacher. It has nothing to do with the words. In fact, if the words aren't in alignment with the attitude, you'll get a lot of conflicting witnesses. Do you really believe that? That's what Helen Schuckman had to face in the end, you know. She said about A Course in Miracles, I know it's true, I just don't believe it. And even from that, we can learn. We can see that there was a fear and a resistance to the experience. In the end, when you go through all these loops and all these gyrations, it finally comes down to, I want the experience of peace of mind. And even deeper than that, I deserve the experience of peace of mind. I am worthy of that. Talk about something that will make the ego start to tremble in its boots when you start to actually feel your worthiness of that love and peace. Then the ego is on the ropes. Then the ego is on its way out in awareness, because that worthiness will just carry you on. That worthiness brings your faith forward. It just carries you. It just lifts you up, you know. And it's finally the thing where you can start to accept the experience. And you're prepared to know that when you start to feel loving experiences, that there's this thing, I call it like ego backlash or ego whiplash. When you start to have very loving experiences, that's when the ego goes from suspicious to vicious. That's when it's like, whoa, getting a little too close there to the escape hatch. You're getting a little too close to unplugging me forever when you start to feel those loving experiences. So it tries to stir up some kind of guilt or fear to make you recoil, to make you shrink back into littleness. You know, how sometimes people say 1 step forward, 2 steps back. The 2 steps back is the ego backlash. It's the ego whiplash. It's the ego trying to secure itself. Say, not so fast. So once you start to be aware of these kind of ego dynamics and games, then you're a little bit quicker to not be fooled by it and to just let it go. You're a little bit more likely, instead of trying to start counting your mistakes or start thinking and trying to analyze your way out of it, trying to start to analyze the darkness. Ooh, no, it's not going to, analyzing the darkness isn't going to work. Believe me, if you get to a point where you have a choice between analyzing the darkness and going, oops, I made a mistake, and quickly handing it over to the Holy Spirit, go for the oops. Don't go for the analysis. It's going to be a dark analysis. But if you can come quickly, more quickly to the oops. I got this album years ago from this guy. I can't think of his name now, but some of you might have heard that song, because I think my friend Scott Kalekstein has redone it. He might have been the one who did it originally, but oops, I made a mistake. You're beautiful, beautiful. Oops, I made a mistake. You're beautiful to me. See how light that is? Imagine when you seem to make a mistake, when you happen to slip into the rut of wrong-mindedness, that as soon as you notice that wrong-minded thought or feeling, you come zooming in with the Holy Spirit, with the oops. And that's what relates to no private thoughts and no people-pleasing. Don't hold on to the mistake. Don't harbor it. Don't protect it. You know, it's the same thing like if you had a wound on your skin, if you never let that wound have any air, if you never let that wound, see the light of day, you would just kind of stay in a wound state. It wouldn't come to that sense of a callus of what we call healing. If you never open it up to the air, it would just stay there. And it's the same with grievances and with mistakes. If we never open them up to the light, and it's just the oops, we've got to come to the oops. The ego doesn't have any oops. I remember when we were over in Sweden, when I first met Lee, and we went, I think there was a time we went and we had a retreat, and just the way that you said the word guilt brought so much lightness. Everybody just started laughing. Why don't you share? Because there's one way. The ego would say guilt. And then your way was
Guilt.
every time she talks, she goes, guilt. Guilt. Sounds like a little Irish limerick or something. Guilt. Guilt. Manly, yes, but I like it too. Guilt. Guilt. And we all were like, guilt, guilt. And everybody was like, just the way you said the word. Everybody said, oh, that's a miracle. I have never heard that word pronounced that way ever before. Because it has such a lightness to it. It's so light. And the ego doesn't want us to see guilt as light. That would be the oops, guilt, oops. It's very, very light. But the ego wants to make it a very, very serious, kind of more like the Catholic black mark on your soul. You will burn in eternity for that, whatever you seem to do, because it wants to make it heavy, dark, like an impenetrable darkness. And that's the contrast between the two belief systems. One is, Jesus defines sin as a mistake to be corrected. The ego defines sin as a black mark on your soul that you'll pay for in eternity. There's a little bit difference in definitions. In the Aramaic, sin was missing the mark. Okay, you missed the mark. That's just another opportunity to go for a bullseye of innocence.